Good morning, boys and girls. It's Friday morning, 8:30, and I'm here at church, and nobody's here with me. I know where you're all at. You're all at home with your mom and dad and people that love you as we try to make our way through this hard time in our country, in our school, in our church. We're all doing this to keep you safe, but maybe sometimes we get a little nervous about that. And so I thought, well, it's Friday morning. I should give you a message from Jesus. And so I'm going to start by reading a gospel from St. Mark, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about that, okay, boys and girls, just like we do every week at the school mass. So St. Mark writes, one of the scribes came up to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" And Jesus replied, "The first is this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying God is one and there is no other than he, and to love him with your heart, mind, and soul, and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is the most important thing you can do." And when Jesus saw that he had answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." So boys and girls, it seems in some ways this man came up to Jesus today because he was kind of giving him a test. He was giving him a test about what is the most important thing you have to do if you're going to be one of his followers. And so, of course, Jesus says, well, the first thing you have to do is love God with your heart, mind, and your soul. And I think, boys and girls, we all agree that's a pretty easy thing to do. We're supposed to love God. We know that God gave us our families, God gave us our friends, God gave us our school. There are lots of reasons to love God. But then Jesus says, and then you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Boys and girls, sometimes that's a lot harder to do. Over the years, I've told you all sorts of stories about kids I went to school with and how sometimes maybe I was mean to those kids or I made fun of those kids. And when I did that, boys and girls, I wasn't following that very important commandment of Jesus. In the same way, I've told you all about my brothers and my sisters and my family and how sometimes I've gotten in fights with them and how I've called them names or made fun of them. And again, boys and girls, I wasn't loving my neighbor. I wasn't following that second rule of Jesus. I know, boys and girls, there's lots of things you have to do every day. I know your teachers are giving you some work to do. I know your mom and dad, they give you chores to do. And sometimes you'd rather just sit around and watch TV. But I think at this time, more than any time, we have to be very clear. We are the followers of Jesus, and there are two things we always do. We love God, and we love our neighbors. Who is our neighbor? Well, of course, our neighbors are the people that live on our street or in our apartment building. And so at this time, well, we can't have really contact with them. And so how do you love your neighbor when you can't go play in their house? Well, boys and girls, you pray for your neighbor, you think about your neighbor, you remember people on your street. But boys and girls, when Jesus talks about the neighbor, he's also talking about members of your family. He's talking about your grandmas and your grandpas who maybe are at home and it's really hard for them because they can't go out, because we have to worry about this virus. And so today, baby boys and girls, why don't you ask your mom if you could call your grandma or your grandpa, or maybe your aunt or your uncle, someone in your family, and just say, I was thinking about you. Because boys and girls, when you do that, you are following both commandments. You are loving God and you're loving your neighbor. And the same way, boys and girls, at home. If you're at home with your brothers or your sisters, and maybe sometimes they drive you crazy, because I know that my brothers and sisters sometimes drove me crazy. Maybe, boys and girls, the best way you could love God and your neighbor is by playing a game with your little brother or your little sister. It might be making them laugh. It might be helping them with homework. It might be just leaving them alone and letting them have a little bit of quiet time. Boys and girls, our neighbors are also, in a story like this, our mom and dad. And lots of mom and dads are trying to do lots of things right now. They're trying to work. They're trying to buy groceries. They're trying to keep you safe. They're trying to keep themselves safe. And so another great way to love God and to love your neighbor is simply just listen to your mom and dad. Try to be kind to them. Boys and girls, the homework I'm going to give you today, your homework from the 8:30 Mass, is today I want you to try really hard to love God and to love your neighbor. And know that Jesus is always with you. That Jesus is always with you. Pray for me, boys and girls, and pray for each other. And I'll see you next week.